The Tale of the Farthing by Kārlis Skalbe. The bathhouse attendant Ansis was standing naked in the moist heat, wiping his eyes and forehead with his hand, from which large drops of sweat dripped. A leather apron was in front of him, and some red legs in wooden clogs. He had rubbed and wriggled hard all day, but no one had given him anything. "Today, my dear, I have nothing for you. Thank you, until next time." That is how his masters parted with him, for whom he, wrapping his hard, strong fingers in the soft white foam, had rubbed their backs with reverence and care all day. But the bathhouse attendant did not complain, and just waited. He knew that every now and then, when a white angel was freezing outside for hours and was knocking at the coldest of hearts, till he was let in, he too would be remembered. He was patient and knew how to wait for his little happiness to arrive unhurriedly, which was walking with its dusty feet along the doors of poor fellows, spreading its little gifts. She could not please their scarcity, and to make that moment bright, giving a knitted woolen hat, she made the poor fellow so happy he forgot his bare feet, giving him a warm flat cake, the need for firewood to kindle the stove. During evening twilight she gazed into the dirty rooms where children snuggled up to one another in the dark, empty corners out of fear and the cold, like turnips in autumn before the frost of the fields. But what could she do? She was the happiness of the poor people, and God had not given her much. And while walking away, a lot of pale hands reached out to her, but all she could show them was an empty apron. "Nothing, there is nothing more," she told them, and shook her white woolen shawl. "If there is a grain stuck to my clothing it will fall, and if there had been a seed from the bright garden of the kingdom come, then in the yard there would grow a golden apple tree, or a beanstalk, on the branches of which could climb the sky." But more often than not, she turned to the basement window, from which just a pair of desperate eyes stared, and said, "Pour neither a curtain nor a half-hearted flower, nor even a yellow flower stem in an old clay pot." She said, "I'll come again." She stared at the window pane, which was black as the blackboard, and smiled at her pale face like a gentle moon in the mist of the morning, her heart breaking with pain. Yes, she was a very unhappy happiness. Up there she had been given too little for the poor fellows. Where there was not enough, a smile had to do. An empty hope had to do, under which there was nothing more than those hard days, which drip into rooms like slow-going driblets from an empty roof. Slowly they fill up in the roof, and you hear how a soiled grey driblet falls next to your feet. "Expected a lot, hoped for a lot, but happiness deceived me," sang the poet of the poor. But what happiness could do? All she had was sweet deception. She was very mournful that she had nothing to give. Then she vanished deep into the forest for days, listening to starlings sing and how a pigeon coos on the side of his nest filled with holes. She needed to see through modesty and joy to believe in happiness. And she truly would have left her a trade and had went to the mountains to an old widow cabin, where there were only such dark spruce trees outside the window, such long shadows in the yellow moon, like wax wheels standing in the dimly lit window pane. It would be such a pleasure to spin the long thread of memory, but she was a little bit of a wizard, little happiness, and when hand of the white giver was too stingy and cold, she turned into the old red-headed spirit, and sometimes she was managing things that only happened in the times of old. Listen here now. When Ansis went up to the steamed-up mirror to look into his reddened eyes, he suddenly saw a small green farthing on the side of the mirror. My mother always told me what is better than a louse to take with me," the bathhouse attendant thought to himself, and put the farthing into his pocket. Even if small, a bliss none the less, the bathhouse attendant thought while walking home, and felt the farthing in his pocket. But what would I do if I found a piece of gold so big like that moon on there? He thought with himself while looking at the moon, which bright and round hang above the dark rooftops. Silly Ansi, Moon said, you found me a long time ago. Do I not shine like the purest of gold to you? You are shining, but you are not warming. But if I had a piece of gold as big as you, I know what I'd do. I would build my mother a warm pine cabin with a red chimney on the roof. Then she would not have to sit in the dark in the evenings. There, in the copper lanterns would burn white high candles like in the priest's house, and there would be never so shortage of salt and bread. What do you boast about your gold in the evening? You come late and you just look through the top pane and crawl off to your stars. But what can I bring home this evening? He kept thinking and walked with his head down, with long heavy strides. He stopped in front of the bakery with a large pretzel on the door, whose lustrous curve dimly gleamed in the moonlight. Something can still be bought for 1 farthing. He went into the bakery. The baker at that moment was climbing up from the oven bakery with a brown pretzel pan on his head. How much? Asked the bathhouse attendant. 2 for 1 farthing, the baker told him, and laid out the pretzels on the table. They still cracked and had the heat of the oven over them. Ansis took 2 of them and put the farthing on the table. While walking he started to eat one. He was very hungry. But when he had finished it, he was even more hungry, and the other pretzel, so warm, was laying in his pocket and was whispering to him, "Eat me, eat me." "I cannot, I'm taking you to mother." "Just take a bite, there will be still enough for mother." Ansis put his hand in his pocket and broke a piece off. But the pretzel was warmly squashing up against him and whispering, "Just take another half. Stop kidding around, I'm not that small." Ansis broke and ate another half. But then he thought, "Who goes home with a half a pretzel? And mother does not expect nor know that I had a farthing." And Ansis ate the rest of the pretzel. Only then he realized that he had ate both of the pretzels and now had to go home empty-handed. "Damn, if I still had another farthing," Ansis exclaimed, and searched his pockets, and by some miracle there actually was another farthing. Could it be the blissful farthing, which always stays in the pocket? "Spend how much you like," Ansis said, and shrewdly thought, "Let's try it." He went back to the bakery, took another 2 pretzels, and put the farthing on the table, looked into his pocket. The farthing was there as it had been before. "Aha! I've got this now," Ansis happily thought, and took a pair after pair of the pretzels, paying a farthing for them, till the table was empty. He stuffed his pockets full of them, tied a scarf, and went happily home. "Mother, we will never have to sit without bread in the evening. I found a lucky farthing," said Ansis, after coming to his dark corner from which his mother's white head rose in the moonlight. He put a load of the pretzels in her lap and told her everything that had happened. "Where is it then?" Mother asked. "Oh, how green it is, like it has slept in the dirt," she said, and took the farthing by her dark, callous fingers into her eyes. "Some say that any luck is buried in the ground. Who knows how to find it finds it. For you, son, she has climbed into your hands herself. Keep her good, who finds it has enough for life." And long into the night Ansis stood by the window, turning the marvelous farthing in his fingers. The second day he put on his green Sunday sweater and then went for a walk. He looked at the buildings and the goods being displayed in the shop doors. He looked at the things that cabmen were carrying in their carts. He looked at it all like he owned it. There in the street new buildings were being built. A worker bent down was stacking bricks on the stretcher. "How much does a brick cost?" asked Ansis, looking at the work. "Farthing apiece," joked the worker, and Ansis realized that he also could have a house. He went down to the brick kiln, where the buried furnaces roared red and everywhere were huge stacks of bricks. Over them glimmered like rose feathers, like dust from rose leaves. To build a high wall toward the evening sun with these bricks, that would be nice. And Ansis asked the brickmaker, would he accept farthings as the payment for bricks? For what farthings? I don't make bricks from copper. Go to the market. There are enough exchanges. There you can change your farthings into gold and silver, said the brickmaker. Ansis shamefully went away. The next morning he went to the market and took his place at the exchange table. He put down and counted farthing after farthing and bought gold and silver. He stood there every day leaning over a pile of money like he had grown to the table. He wanted to be the master of the city, master of the streets where he had walked, squeezing to the sides, shriven in his rags like a poor bathhouse attendant. In all the corners of the city they were building houses for him. Stone masons were building and constantly rising closer to the sky with the growing buildings. On the ground, mournfully and brightly sounded the stone mason chisels, and the carpenters were paring long golden chippings. The saws were gasping. All the corners were full of work and life. Only the master was sitting on his pile of money, and on his forehead grew two firm dry lines. He did not have time to even raise his eyes. Every free moment cost him a farthing, and what was there to see? Every house, these stands, all of this market was in that dirty heap of money which lay in front of him. The sand could not be bought, but any dog sleeping next to the gate could lay in its heat. Sometimes his mother, leaning on her stick, came to him, and he quickly squeezed the farthing in her palm. Don't have time, I give you what you need, but what is there much to talk about? Every word cost me a farthing. And mother went back to her dark corner, where wind crept through the crumbled corners, and the rain dribbled from the holes in the ceiling. Once the son had promised a warm pine hut, but did he have the time to think about it now? And the new houses that he was building were such expensive apartments. Was there even a place for such an old and ordinary person? She did not understand her son, but believed in him, and was kind to him. Her son was rich and powerful. Could there even be a greater fortune in her old age? But in the evenings, when the workers with their heavy steps were coming home from work, she became restless, and thought how good it was back when Ansis, coming home from work, put his hand in her lap and poured out his sorrows. Back then he had nothing more than sorrows, but he had her heart in his sorrows. Many years passed like that. Ansis already owned half the city, and everyone called him Rich Ansis. There were folk in his houses like bees in honeycomb. Without the everyday worries and failures, they amassed a lot of love and friendship like sweet honey. Only Rich Ansis did not have a friend, except the farthing, which had been rubbed red from regular use. Mother was dead, and he did not try people. Friends only took time. He had grown a long grey beard, and his fingers, like bugs, crawled over the gold and the silver. But like a tree which had stood straight, it eventually bends, when its core has dried out. That is how Rich Ansis, who had not been seen, one Sunday. He looked up his farthings in an iron basement, and went outside the city for a walk. The weather was nice. People walked in cheerful crowds with friends, wives and children, lovingly holding hands. Only Rich Ansis suddenly turned away from these people. For how can such a rich and powerful person walk with the rest of them? Only his friends slept in his pocket, and he constantly thought about it like golden-legged bees about blood-red flowers. Rich Ansis turned down the side road and then ended up in a beautiful ravine, and found a lonely spring under a cherry tree, which dropped blossoms in the long grass like snowflakes in the slow wind. He wiped his forehead and came down at the spring on the ground. Blue and yellow butterflies flew from flower to flower, like flowers torn away by the wind. Brown, blue, and gold insects were tinkling and flashing all around, and the grass was moved downward by silent tiny streams of water, like gleaming silver. mosquitoes peering restless along her roots. Rich Ansis put down his hat and cane, and the wind blew a pleasant sense of peace on his forehead. "No, it is truly beautiful," he said, looking down at the stream. A stern old man's face stared at him from the stream water. Yes, yes, it was Rich Ans's face, his very own. He had liked it well, and he pulled out the lucky farthing out of his pocket and smiled and showed it to the picture in the water. And the reflection smiled at him and showed a red copper farthing glowing sharply on the tranquil, greenish level of the stream. Rich Ansis had never been as close to happiness as he was at this moment, but at that moment the farthing fell out of his hand and into the water, and at the bottom of the spring, on the white swirl that came relentlessly from the ground, a red devil rose and spread its arms with laughter. "Goodbye, Ansi!" he bursted out laughing, and his words came from the bottom of the spring like red bubbles. "Now I am clean, and you can go. I do not need you any more. Everything that was on me now is on your hands. See how you have rubbed me clean? Ha! You thought you were the master? Ha 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 ha! I was the master, and you scrubbed my back. I now answer you hoped for a prosperous and happy life, but what did you do? What did you do? All your life you scrubbed the poor devil's back. You wanted to be master, but you stayed only a bathhouse attendant, nothing more." The stream began to swirl and hiss, and Nancy, shivering in fear, pulled his face away from the water. But the devil, red and young, went back into the fires of hell. Ansis spread his arms and wanted to run after him, but in front of him was only a diluted spring, from which came a strong sulphur stench. When Ansis was slowly walking back home, his ears rang like he was empty inside. That is how his life ended, with nothing inside. His heart did not find new love, and his fingers, who only knew how to rake money, did not learn to give. When Ansis was gone, the birch cherry tree stirred in happiness. Herself appeared in its place in her white woolen scarves. She went next to the spring, whose water was once again gentle and as green as grass, and she leaned over it. A silent grey tear fell into the clear water, and the water has been sour since then. The happiness vanished back into the depths of the forest, and the fisherman, raising his empty bag, and a ploughman, wiping his sweat at the end of the hard furrow, sighed, "God only knows where has my happiness gone, like it has fallen in water." But happiness thought, how good would it be there in the mountain, in the silent hut, where a precious round wax moon looked through a window. There it would be nice to spin the long thread of sadness.